Hello and welcome. I'm Phil Torres, here to talk about innovations that can change lives. We're going to explore the intersection of hardware and humanity, and we're doing it in a unique way. This is a show about science by scientists. Let's check out our team of hardcore nerds. Kyle Hill is an engineer. Tonight, he's hitting America's football fields to investigate head-to-head combat and the cutting-edge technology that could help detect a concussion before it's too late. Lindsay Moran is an ex-CIA operative. Tonight, she has the innovative and biodegradable packaging that could one day replace styrofoam. Rochelle Oldmixon is a neuroscientist who specializes in human behaviors. And I'm Phil Torres. I'm an entomologist. I study insects in the rainforest of Peru. That's our team. Now let's do some science. Hi guys, welcome back to Techno. I'm Phil Torres and I'm here with Rochelle, Kyle, and Lindsay. Now, Kyle, the NFL paid over $750 million to settle a lawsuit. What was that lawsuit about?
Well, now there's been an increasing focus on the concussion problem in football, and it's important to the NFL. They have thousands of players. There's also millions of players playing youth and college football. So what you're gonna see here, I went to Virginia Tech to look at the technology they're using to test helmets and to track hits on college and youth players. Let's take a look. Homecoming in the heartland. This is Cornhusker country, Nebraska University, the epicenter of college football.
First Big Ten win of the year!
And along with the traditions of football come the hits. Big hits, like this one that happened right in front of our cameras. No one knows how hard the hits can be better than Blake Lawrence, former starting linebacker for the University of Nebraska's Cornhuskers.
Imagine if you had to like bang your head into somebody and that was your job. And so we practiced it. Your head is your best weapon as a defender.
If someone said your job is to go and run face first into that wall,
and you're like, I would do it for the sport.
Blake had been doing it for the sport his whole life, but he started to question that after he suffered 3 concussions his first year playing college football.
My third concussion, which was the one when I had to realize like something was wrong, was right here. Just run up and boom. You know, and you just like, you start getting dizzy and...
Dizzy, foggy.
Oh yeah.
You didn't even know where you were.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy is after that play, coach came up and said, great job. I did my job.
Sure.
And just, I had to sacrifice my brain to do it.
When a player like Blake gets a concussion-causing blow, his head and brain move rapidly, which can cause the brain to bounce around or twist in the skull. That can disrupt brain function. Midway through the 2013 season, the NFL reports more than 50 players have been sidelined by concussions.
1, 2, 3, let's go!
For young players, multiply that number by 1,000. Each year, more than 55,000 kids end up in the emergency room for football-related concussions. Local news coverage of catastrophic head injuries has increased public awareness of the problem.
Friends of Tyler Llewellyn were joined in prayer at a Riverside church. The high school football player collapsed during football practice last week and died last night.
Football tragedy in the Southern Tier, bringing together now the small town of Brockton to remember a life taken far too early.
So what kinds of hits are likely to land a player in the hospital rather than the end zone? And how do you reduce a player's risk of concussion? Stefan Duma, head of Virginia Tech's biomedical engineering department, has spent the last decade studying the Hokies to answer those questions.
Our mission isn't to end football. The mission is to understand what's happening and make the game better.
What have you learned from this research so far?
We can tell you very well, a college player, what kind of exposure they're going to have. We can break it down by position. If you're a quarterback, a linebacker, or a lineman, we can tell you exactly what that exposure is.
Now, that impact simulated 100 Gs of acceleration on your brain, or about 100 times faster than an object in free fall would experience. And that puts you firmly in the range of concussion risk. That looks serious because it is. That's the kind of force you might experience in a serious car crash. So right here on this little diagram, you can actually see the impacts that players are taking. This is how Professor Duma collects his raw data, with the Head Impact Telemetry System, or HITS for short. It picks up information from sensors placed in a player's helmet that measure the angle and the acceleration of the head any time a player is hit.
There it is, right there. Good night.
So the system is showing real-time impacts right here.
Yeah, basically within a couple seconds of the actual impact, it'll come in through this antenna. We can actually see live what's happening to these players.
And you can plot these out over not just a few seconds, but over the course of an entire practice or even an entire season.
Absolutely.
We were one of the first teams in the country to limit the exposure in practices because we had all this data that said, hey, we're getting really high exposure in practice. We don't need to run all these drills. The data allowed us to see that.
In 2011, Virginia Tech teamed up with youth leagues to research young players as well.
I don't think anyone expected the exposure numbers that we found. From the first age, the 7- to 8-year-old teams, the average number of impacts is 150 per season per player. And some of those can be 60, 70, 80 times the acceleration of gravity.
Can you do that 5 times again?
10-year-old Ryan is one of the young players Virginia Tech is studying. He suffered a head injury a week ago in a running drill. Dr. Mark Rogers, a team physician for the Hokies, is giving him a follow-up exam.
Does that bother your headache at all? I go up here.
We found even in 8 to 10-year-olds, they're getting a lot of hits during practice and some pretty good G-force hits. Some of the hits they were getting at that age group are even up to 100 Gs.
That's
so
danger range.
It's high.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that stuff kind of generated some real changes at the Pop Warner level as well. So they're not doing a lot of those head-to-head contacts. They're not doing a lot of the hitting drills during the week.
The fact that he may, in fact, have had a concussion, does it give you any reservations about football?
Oh, well, certainly when your children gets injured, it makes you think. But as long as you have programs like this where people are trying to help and make sure the kids can stay as safe as possible. And to be honest, I wouldn't hesitate putting him back out there next year if he wants to play, but that'll be his decision.
Professor Duma is also trying to make the game safer by creating an independent rating system for helmets based on how they reduce the risk of concussion.
So we look at front, side, back, top impacts at a range of energy levels. And for every test, we multiply that by how many times that player is going to see it in a given year. Everything's summed together, and that gives you a star rating. And the basic thing is the helmets that absorb energy better, lower acceleration, and that lowers risk.
So right here you have what looks like a helmet cannon. What is this modeling different from the other test?
So what we're doing now is we're going away from the single linear drop, but we know that every head impact has linear and rotation. So you have an energy input, it's going to strike the head, and on this test the head can rotate and it'll slide away.
3, 2, 1, go. Remember this 100G hit? Professor Duma says a 5-star helmet could reduce the head acceleration from that hit by as much as 50%. That's because the shell and the interior spread out the force of the impact.
You will never eliminate all concussions. There is no preventative helmet, but there are helmets that reduce your risk, just like 5-star cars reduce your risk of dying in a car crash. Our focus is reducing the risk as much as possible.
As for Blake Lawrence, whose whole life had been devoted to football, the risks of the game meant he suddenly had to face a painful decision.
Our head coach, Bo Pelini, had taken me aside and said, your concussions are happening too easily. That summer, before my junior year at Nebraska, I told myself and told my family and the coaches and the trainers and the doctors that if I had one more concussion, no matter the circumstance, I would step away from the sport of football. And that was really easy to say, not that easy to do.
Looking at that piece, just watching it, I feel like that gave me a headache. Now, Rochelle, you have a background in neuroscience.
Yes.
What type of damage are we looking at that happens to the actual brain when you get one of those big head-on-head collisions?
Well, that's an interesting question. And there are thousands of researchers across the country trying to figure that out. Some people believe that there's shearing happening at the very ends of neural pathways, so the connections between the different parts of the brain are weaker. People are thinking that you're getting tears in the tissue, which again would weaken the overall structure and function. There's the idea of bruising and temporary damage through swelling. So there's a lot.
There's a lot.
Yeah, and a lot of it luckily is temporary, but some of it, could be pretty serious.
I really want my kids to watch this segment because my 8-year-old wanted to play football. It's huge where we are. And I've been trying to explain to him the danger involved. I mean, as a mom, it's hard for me to watch those shots of the impact.
Kyle, we're about to get a bit more in-depth on this concussion piece. What do you got next for us?
So now we're gonna look at what happens neurologically when you get a concussion. I put on 256 sensors on my head and took a really hard test to determine that. So let's take a look. It's game day at Memorial Stadium, and the Huskers are taking on Illinois. But this stadium houses more than these 90,000 plus fans. It's also a home to a laboratory devoted to finding answers to the concussion crisis.
We have cutting-edge brain imaging techniques actually in the facility where the athletes are training on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
Dennis Malfis is director of the university's brand new Center for Brain, Biology, and Behavior. Why is it so hard to figure out what a concussion actually is?
Right now, concussion is mostly described in terms of symptoms. Headache, sleep disturbances, disorientation, memory problems. So we know it's some disruption of brain function, but we're unable to identify at present exactly what that disruption is.
All right, Kyle, I'm gonna put this towel on your neck right here, just because this is soaked in water.
This cap, called a dense array electroencephalogram, or EEG, is one of the cutting-edge pieces of technology Professor Malfis is using to unlock those mysteries.
You guys have a nickname for this thing? Because I'm gonna call it the science octopus.
This cap has 256 electrodes in it, picking up on currents that are going on continuously over the scalp that are generated from within the brain. In those brain waves are information about your memory processes, your decision-making, speed of processing, what different areas are being engaged to do anything.
It's a bit more wetness than I thought there was gonna be.
Huskers who volunteer to be a part of Professor Malfis's research undergo an EEG while they take a memory test, just like I'm doing here. This one is called the two-back test. I have to identify which letters in a sequence match 2 spots earlier.
So again, for match, use the button number 1 with your left thumb, and then when it doesn't match, press 4 with your right thumb.
Dang it. Geez, they're going very fast.
We think this cap is a really critical way of assessing whether concussion really has occurred.
That's not the only thing you're using. You're also doing brain scans and using other technologies.
We have the only system in the world that we can collect the high-density EEG data. At the same time, we're collecting MRI data. MRI data gives us information about the structure of the brain. We can actually look at things in a multi-dimensional way.
These images are from a football player without a concussion. They show distinct changes in brainwave activity as the player distinguishes between a match and a non-match. But look at a player who has had a concussion. There's no change.
They're virtually identical.
And why is that?
Because at that point, their brain hasn't figured out the task yet. It hasn't processed the fact of, that this number is identical to that. So at a minimum, it's probably being delayed. These are people who experienced a head injury sometime previously, so they may have had this for a year.
Wow.
And so after a year,
You still have the lingering effects.
the brain is still not processing it when it should have.
Luckily, my test showed a regular change in brainwave activity.
So your brain response, you'll be happy to know, is like we would expect from a normal individual.
That's good.
So we can give you a certification on this.
Yeah, a little form says I'm not concussed. What do you see the immediate application to be? Is it to have something like a neural EEG out on the sidelines that can help players in real time?
Very much so. The holdup right now is getting the analysis procedures down to a point where they're practical, where we can tell the coach within 5 minutes, this person clearly has a concussion, they really should not be going back into the game.
Would a player have some kind of idea with technology like this of when to stop playing?
I think ultimately that's our hope, is that we can provide the players and coaches with information that can tell them, okay, you're at a danger point, don't do this anymore.
Blake Lawrence didn't have the benefit of a definitive diagnostic tool when he suffered his 4th concussion. He had to make the decision about what to do next on his own.
I spent the next hour and a half of practice pretty much on a knee by myself, just running through the scenario in my head of, should I tell anyone, should I not? I've always been a football player. After practice, I decided to walk right by our trainer's door, just like you would in a film. I stopped and backpedaled and walked right in. I said, I'm done. I've suffered another concussion and my career's over, and just emotional. I was a wreck.
Would you say that then you regret your decision?
I don't regret leaving football. I don't regret protecting myself. I wanted to see a long future of health and happiness, and I couldn't risk that.
Blake is now an entrepreneur running 2 businesses, something he thinks he wouldn't have been able to do if he got another concussion. He also volunteers his time to educate families about the risks of playing football.
Football's a game. If I could talk to every kid that is putting on their helmet this weekend to play football, no matter what level, I'd say this is a game, right? And this is life. I mean, this is life, and this is what I get to experience because I stepped away from football.
Sure.
But imagine if I didn't. Why would I sacrifice my life for a game?
I don't think there's ever going to be a concussion-proof helmet, because you can think of this like a car crash. If you were the brain and the car is your skull, if the car stops suddenly, it doesn't matter if the car is indestructible, you, the brain, is still going to fly forward and hit the dashboard of the windshield. That's what a concussion is. It's your brain hitting the skull. So we have to think about this in a different way than just making an indestructible helmet.
You think it could also be applied to things like soldiers who are coming back from war? Because I'm sure a lot of them are getting hit.
The
in the heads
labs
as
that I
well.
went to actually were working with things like DARPA, like things like the Department of Defense, because when you undergo a grenade blast or something like that, there is still a shock wave that moves your brain like an NFL hit would.
Kyle, really interesting stuff. Now, Lindsay, this story is basically about how mushrooms are going to change the world.
Yeah, mushrooms are going to change the world, according to these guys. I went to upstate New York, where these 2 guys have a company called Incubated, and they figured out a way to make an alternative to packaging material out of entirely biodegradable materials and mushrooms. So let's check it out.
Yeah, every cubic inch of this soil right here is teeming with millions of inches of mycelium. And all around us, even though you can't see them, there are fungi growing everywhere.
A walk through the woods in Green Island, New York is pure pleasure. But when you're with 2 barely 30-year-old geniuses like Gavin McIntyre and Eben Baer,
There's a piece of fungi there.
You're sure to stumble on something scientifically complex.
And you can see the mycelium growing directly into the log.
And chances are, it somehow involves a mushroom.
We're here at Incubated Design, and I'm one of the co-founders and chief scientists here at this really, truly revolutionary new biomaterials company, where we're taking local farm waste, mixing it with tissue from mushrooms, and growing replacements for plastic foams that are used in protective packaging.
And why is this so important? Like, what's the problem with styrofoam?
There's about $10 billion to $20 billion of styrene products used globally, from packaging to building construction to automotive. It's not like plastics equals bad. It's that they're fundamentally uncompatible with the Earth's biosphere.
Here are a couple of pieces of polystyrene. We've all seen these before. Almost every big product we buy comes packaged in this material. But here's the problem with it. These are made from unsustainable petrochemicals, and it can take up to 1 million years, maybe even more, for this material to biodegrade and leave the earth.
So we use a combination of agricultural waste like corn husks and mushrooms as a resin. And we combine these two together and we grow them in a mold to make a shape for everything from packaging to auto parts.
A mushroom that you see growing out of the side of a tree is entirely comprised out of mycelium. But if you were to look into that tree structure or along the forest floor, what you'll find is a vast network of these unicellular strands, little fibers that are growing through the soil of the environment as well as in trees. And that's what's really gluing a mushroom, say, onto the side of a tree or to the forest floor.
And do you guys grow your own mushrooms?
One of our keys is we actually never grow mushrooms. We just keep the mycelium in this vegetative growth stage where it's always making more of this root structure. The initial concept of using mushroom roots or mycelium as a resin was inspired when I saw mycelium growing through wood chips and holding them together. But the combination with agricultural waste as a feedstock didn't come till much later after I teamed up with Gavin.
This is where it all starts, with this farm waste.
It actually takes close to 7 days for a product to be grown from beginning to completion. But we're about to show you how it works in seconds.
What is all this?
The waste is first cleaned right before adding the mycelium. Then it gets incubated for about 2 to 3 days and it becomes a solid white mass. Next, it goes through a trommel, a machine that grinds the waste.
This is reminding me of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and I'm afraid I'm going to get sucked up in the trommel.
Grinding it into a type of mulch so it can be packed into the molds. The molds are then stacked and left for another 3 days, where the mycelium does what the mycelium does: grow. All that's left is to bake it at a low temperature of 200 degrees to stunt the growth of the mycelium.
Freshly baked fungus. But here's what's really cool about mushroom packaging. I can take this packaging material and actually bury it in my yard, and within a couple of months, it will biodegrade. And not only that, but add valuable nutrients to the soil.
Incubated is about to begin large-scale manufacture of plastic-free products. And the possibilities go far beyond protective packaging. They are now developing home insulation.
Do you guys feel like you're having an impact on humanity?
Yeah, well, you know, really we see this as looking forward centuries, not just days. And we want to make sure that this environment is available for our grandchildren and our grandchildren's children, and that we're taking best use of the natural resources that are provided us today.
What else are they thinking of using it for?
Well, they have a very Edisonian approach at Incubated, and in fact, they have just launched the world's first mushroom surfboards.
Huh.
So these are going to be surfboards, and instead of having a core that's made out of some kind of petrochemical, it's going to be made entirely out of this material.
I just love this piece because I had no idea that mushrooms could do so much for us.
Who knew?
Who knew, right? Really amazing stories, you guys. Thank you so much for coming this week, and we will catch you next time on Techno.
Dive deep into these stories and go behind the scenes at aljazeera.com/techno. Follow our expert contributors on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and more.